Hi, I'm Kaja.
And I'm Joanna.
And this is Starlit Citadel Reviews.
Hi everyone. So today would have been our 100th video review. Instead of picking just one game, we're going to do something a little bit special, and Joanna and I are going to tell you about our top 5 thematic games of all time.
So most games have theme. There aren't too many games out there that you can say have no theme at all, but that doesn't mean that every game that has a theme is a thematic game. So to me, a thematic game means a game in which the environment and the world and the story of the game plays just as big a part in the enjoyment of the game as the mechanics do. And now those mechanics, which have to be strong because it's a good game to start with, can't just have a theme pasted on top of them either. It has to feel like the theme was really considered in the design process, that those mechanics really play into it, that everything that you do in the game makes sense in the story, that there isn't some sort of strange extra action that takes place just to take up time, because this does happen in a lot of games, that you'll end up with a mechanic that's a catch-up mechanic that doesn't make sense in the story, and it takes you out of that world, and that kind of breaks a good thematic game for me. And now thematic games are really important to me. So it took a long time for me to figure out what my 2 favorite thematic games were. Theme is really important. I love story. When I'm picking a game, this is a really important part of the process for me. And so my 2 games were very well considered, and I decided to pick 2 that were just a little bit different on either side. My first one is Red November. Now, it's a little bit comedic, it's a little bit silly. That world that you live in is incredibly unique in this game. You're not going to find any other game that's quite like this. So you are gnomes that are in an experimental submarine, which is falling apart, and you're trying to hold it together for long enough to survive. And now not only is the theme really unique, but also the mechanics are quite unique as well. So there's a few mechanics in there that are quite challenging and quite interesting and quite special. And they might take a little bit for you to wrap your head around, but by the time you do, you're going to realize that all of those nice little bits and pieces and that complexity that was worked in plays into that theme beautifully. So you're going to be running around this submarine dealing with pressure and oxygen leaks and floods and fires, and everything's really intense, and it feels like you're gonna fall apart any moment. There's a real pace to this game, and it plays in beautifully to that feeling. Right up to the very end, where there's an alternate ending, where if you feel like you want to abandon all of your companions and flee this cooperative scenario, then you can try and swim for safety. It almost feels here like a movie where all of the plot elements have been taken care of. You don't have any weird questions at the end. You're like, well, why did they do that? Why didn't they do that? No, everything makes sense here, which is fantastic and a really great example of a thematic game. Now, my second choice for thematic game is a little bit different, though it is still cooperative, so this says something to me about what good thematic games are to me. Maybe I lean a little bit more towards the cooperative side. My second game is Eldritch Horror. So this is a bit bigger, for sure. This is not your comedic Red November. This is a bit heavier, a bit longer. This is the kind of thematic game that I'm gonna play when I wanna sit down with a few people and really delve into this world for a good, solid 3 hours, just lose myself in the Lovecraftian world. And now I love Lovecraft stuff. If you've watched too many of these reviews, then you're going to know that I really love it. So it definitely had to make it into my top thematic games. This game, though, has so much detail packed into it that's drawn really nicely and really considerately from the Lovecraft mythos. So the spell cards and the characters and the map and the design and the art all really plays into that world. And it's a really rich world. It exists already in literature, and there's so many stories about it, and it feels like they've really gone there and they've really used it. So that it's really exciting. If you can sit in this world and play this intense sort of battle against an elder god together, it's just a really, really amazing experience. And the world really contributes to that incredible experience here. The mechanics are really tight and really nice. The decision making it makes a lot of sense, and it's very intense. Like, it feels like everything that you do makes a difference in the story. And that's why I really love this as an excellent example of sort of a larger, heavier, cooperative thematic game.
So the thing for me that differentiates a thematic game from just a game with a theme is that thematic games exist in a world of their own. They have characters and not just cubes. They have settings and not just maps or boards. They feel like they're in real worlds that are inhabited by real people or goblins or penguins or what have you. But the point is that they feel real, and any actions that you take as a player are seen as directly impacting this world, as shaping it, and as being informed by it. The environment that you're playing in affects the choices that you make. You don't just think purely tactically about how you would win this game. You think about how you would defeat that giant, or how you would get over this hill, or how you would deal with this very real looming natural disaster. There's a sense of immersion that comes from a completeness of the world of the game. And of course, that has to be informed by the mechanics. To me, a truly fantastic thematic game doesn't just have mechanics that fit well into the theme, it has mechanics that come naturally out of that theme in the first place. They're informed by it. The way that you move through terrain exists because that terrain is real and it's difficult and it is natural to move through it that way. The decision points that you're offered make sense because of the kind of character that you're playing, or because of the kind of environment that they exist in. And so the mechanics and the theme work together in order to make the world more real and push that theme to influence not only your experience of the game, but the way that you think through it. So my first pick should come as no surprise to anybody who's watched either of our top 10 episodes, because I'm pretty sure I worked it into both of them, and that is Claustrophobia. This is a very tight, asymmetric, tactical two-player game, and I find that asymmetry in particular as a mechanic is a really, really good kind of shortcut to evoking theme, because it means that, especially in a two-player game, both players are going to have very different experiences of the same world and the same situation, and that automatically makes it more lifelike, because no two people experience the same thing with perfect symmetry. What makes Claustrophobia particularly special, though, is that asymmetry extends all the way through mechanics, gameplay, and pacing. The thing that's great about this game is the way in which the time that it takes for you to play matters, because it dramatically shifts the balance of power. If you're playing as the humans, you start out with all of these options. You've got all of these abilities, you've got all of these weapons. There's a whole bunch of you. You come storming into this labyrinth, ready to kick ass and take names, and you've got the ability to do it. But as time goes by and you get tired and you get worn out by combat and you get deeper into the labyrinth, you get weaker and your enemy gets stronger. And there's this really powerful sense of dread and this sense that you have to rush, you have to seize the moment and win the game before you run out of time. And your constraint is not that there's a timer on the game or that you're going to run out of options. It's the very real threat that your enemy is growing. And that's a great feeling to have from the demon side of things, where you start out with some little piddly minion troglodytes that can't do very much. And as the game goes on, you become more and more powerful. You have hordes of these things to throw at the human. You have big, powerful demons that you can summon, and you really feel the force and the momentum of the game shifting in your favor. There's this wonderful kind of tidal shift that happens between both sides that's perfectly informed by the mechanics. It all has to do with how the dice are used, with the mechanical decisions that you're making and the options that the game presents you, but it comes across purely thematically, and it becomes this scary, visceral, and really, really powerful two-player experience. So my second choice is Android Netrunner. Now, like Claustrophobia, this is a tactical two-player asymmetric game, and the asymmetric mechanics definitely add a lot to the immersion. There's a really big difference between how the corporation plays and how the runner plays, and that makes each side feel really unique and a lot more real. But what I really want to highlight with this game is the degree to which it's built a believable and large and expansive world. It's really the most impressive game to me in this regard, especially because it does almost all of it through a line of text or two and a picture across a couple hundred cards. cards. Fantasy Flight Games has done a really, really good job of building characters and stories and through lines in these little card expansions that come out that just really bring the world of Netrunner to life. As a little example, there's a character named Thomas Haas who first shows up on a corporate card as a middling asset of questionable reliability, and he's described as the incompetent or at least disinterested son of the director of the corporation that he's a part of. Later on, he appears on cards that belong to the runner's side. First, he appears as a source of useful, if questionably secure, information. And later on, he appears as a hostage who may not be a hostage at all. Between that and a couple of other cards, you develop this really great sense of not only what Thomas is like as a character, but how he fits into the world around him, who he interacts with, who he's disappointed, who he's working for, who might be coming after him. And it develops this really great sense that there's a real person who you're kind of watching appear in real situations rather than a face on a card, which is all that he really is. I also really want to single out the diversity in Netrunner. There is a plethora of different backgrounds, different genders, different gender roles, and different social positions that are represented on the cards in Netrunner. And it's not just that it's nice to see women blowing stuff up every once in a while or have heroes who aren't white dudes. It actually adds a ton to the world building. The setting for Netrunner is far future cyberpunk, and there's an idea of global integration. There's a sense that national boundaries have been replaced by corporate polities. There's a sense that the entire world is connected, and you really get that when you look at a massively diverse cast of characters. You see that these are people from all over the world. You see that these are people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, with different experiences, and it gives you a sense that this world is multidimensional. It's big, it's rich, everything that you do impacts a much broader scope than just one tiny nation or one tiny city or one tiny enclave. And it really, really creates a sense that this is a real world. Not just that this is a real world, but that this could perhaps be our world in the future. I've never seen a game pull this off quite as well, and the fact that the mechanics support this difference and this diversity and this challenge, and the fact that it's a really fun game to play, has really pushed Netrunner up a lot in my estimation.
So when Kai and I sat down and started talking about thematic games and our favorite thematic games, one particular game stood out for both of us. So we've made it our number one out of this top 5, and that is Dungeon Petz. Now, Dungeon Petz is, again, a very unique theme. There's a lot of thematic games out there that follow certain paths. You've got your agricultural games, you've got your train games, you've got your dungeon delves, that kind of thing. This, entirely different. You are imps that are raising pets to sell in dungeons, and those pets are various monsters. And the detail that goes into this game and what you have to do to raise those pets and make sure they don't die and they don't get sick and they're all fed well is incredibly immersive. The art, the design, all of the mechanics really play into this theme. Everything that you do makes sense in that world. There's no strange questions, there's no errant actions that you're not sure how they play into the story. No, everything is very, very tight. And the thing is, there's a lot of detail in what you have to do to make sure that these pets survive to market, and none of it ever feels onerous. None of it feels like bookkeeping. All of it feels like a really important part of the story and a lot of fun, and there's a lot of engagement in it. It never feels like you've sort of got to tick off a whole lot of boxes to make sure that, you get through the phases of the game. No, everything is beautifully laid out to play into that kind of wacky, kind of silly, and really complex world.
So I agree with everything Joanna just said about Dungeon Petz, and I'd also really like to single out a couple elements that I think really show just how far you can go to build the world of your game and to integrate the mechanics and the theme. As the first thing that I want to point to is the rulebook for this game. It's written like a couple other rulebooks by this particular designer, Vladek Fatil. It's written from the perspective of somebody who exists in that world. It's not the voice of the designer explaining the game to you. It's the voice of somebody who lives in the world of these imps, who understands their daily lives, and is just telling you how to go about your business. And that extends all the way to these really great interpretive asides, like explaining to you gently that when a pet dies and new meat appears in one of the market stalls, which by the way is a beautifully integrated bit of mechanics, it doesn't mean that the pet died. It went off to live on a farm somewhere, and that mechanic is just entirely unrelated. There's a really cute bit of lamp shading to a perfectly thematically integrated game trying to convince you that one of its mechanics is arbitrary, and all it does is really highlight just how well built this world is and how intelligently everything fits together and feels like the actions of real people or imps in a real world. This extends to the point that when a new mechanic is introduced, for example in the expansion, Dark Alleyways, it feels like a natural outgrowth of the behavior of the imps rather than something that's been imposed from the outside by the designer. And the best example of this, to my mind, is the little trinkets and artifacts that they can purchase from the slug shop, that they get put on the collar of the pet and they increase their value, and they have all these kinds of nice mechanical advantages. But the real value of these artifacts is that when you send out a shopping group to pick them up, one imp comes back with the item to the burrow immediately and then becomes available for later use. This is hugely powerful from a tactical perspective, but the way it's explained in the rules is that the reason the imp comes back is because they're so excited to show everybody back home the shiny thing they just bought. And that's exactly what an imp would do. You read that rule and you don't think, well, that's kind of a contrived way of bringing back one of your pieces, which it might in a less well-realized game. Instead, you think, oh yeah, no, that's totally what they're doing. They're kind of goofy, they're overly excitable. This is exactly how my imps behave. And the fact that the game makes it feel like its mechanics are just kind of things that would naturally happen is a really, really impressive example of just how well you can integrate mechanics and theme. Also, I mean, imps raising monsters, it's adorable.
Hey, I wonder what top 5 we should do next.